The fluorescent lights of the hospital parking garage buzz overhead like dying insects, casting sickly yellow pools across oil-stained concrete. My sneakers squeak against the ground as I walk, exhaustion weighing down every step after a 12-hour shift that felt more like 20. 3 patients coded tonight. 2 we brought back. 1 we lost. Mrs. Patterson, 73, grandmother of 6, who smiled at me yesterday and told me about her daughter's wedding next month. The metallic scent of blood still clings to my scrubs beneath my jacket, a ghost I cannot wash away no matter how many times I scrub my hands. I am thinking about her face when I hear the shouting. Male voices, sharp and angry, echoing off concrete pillars in the level below mine. I freeze. Keys clutched between my fingers the way Catherine taught me in that self-defense class we took last year. The shouting escalates. Then gunfire cracks through the air like the world splitting open. My heart slams against my ribs. Every instinct screams, run, get to your car, drive away, call the police from somewhere safe. But then I see him. A young man stumbling between parked cars, one hand pressed to his shoulder, where dark blood streams between his fingers, staining his white shirt black in the dim light. He is maybe 25, dark-haired, his face twisted in pain. He collapses against a concrete pillar, and I watch his knees buckle. More gunshots. Closer now. Sparks fly as bullets ricochet off metal and stone. He is going to die if I do nothing. The thought arrives with perfect clarity, cutting through my fear like a surgical blade. My feet move before my mind catches up, carrying me forward in a crouch toward the wounded man. Stupid, so incredibly stupid. I reach him as his eyes roll back, his body sliding down the pillar. I grab his jacket and haul him behind the thick concrete column, my nursing training overriding the primal terror clawing up my throat. His shoulder is a mess, the wound high and to the left, blood pumping with his heartbeat. I yank my scarf from around my neck and press it hard against the injury. He gasps, eyes flying open, pale blue and unfocused. He tries to speak, but only manages a wet cough. "Stay with me," I whisper, though I do not know if he can hear me over the pounding of my own pulse in my ears. I hear an engine roar to life somewhere in the garage. Tires screech against concrete. Are they leaving or coming closer? The man beneath my hands grabs my wrist with surprising strength, his lips forming words I cannot understand. His blood is hot and sticky, soaking through my scarf, coating my fingers. I have stopped bleeding in the ER 100 times, but this is different. This is chaos and darkness, and the suffocating certainty that whoever fired those shots might return to finish what they started. Footsteps echo from somewhere I cannot see. My breathing comes too fast, too shallow. I press harder against the wound and pray to a God I stopped believing in after too many nights like tonight. The roar of an engine tears through the relative silence, echoing off concrete walls like thunder in a canyon. A black SUV speeds into the garage from the upper ramp, tires screeching as it takes the corner too fast, headlights cutting through the darkness with blinding intensity. I tense, every muscle in my body coiling to run, but the wounded man's hand clamps around my wrist with desperate strength, his fingers cold and slick with blood. "Stay," he gasps, the word barely audible. The SUV skids to a halt 20 feet away, and the doors fly open before the vehicle even stops rocking on its suspension. Men pour out, 4, then 5, all wearing dark suits that look expensive even in the dim light, all holding guns with the casual ease of people who use them often. My heart hammers so hard I taste copper on my tongue. This is it. This is how I die. In a parking garage on a Tuesday night because I could not walk away from someone bleeding. But the guns do not point at me. They fan out in a protective formation, scanning the shadows, the concrete pillars, the dark spaces between parked cars. And then he steps out of the passenger side. Tall, easily over 6 feet, with shoulders that fill his charcoal suit jacket in a way that speaks of power barely contained. Dark hair styled back from a face all sharp angles and hard lines, a jaw that could cut glass. But it is his eyes that stop my breath. Gray like winter storms, cold and assessing, sweeping across the scene with an intensity that feels like a physical force. Those eyes land on the man I am still holding together with my blood-soaked scarf, and something flickers across his expression. Not quite emotion, but close. He moves toward us with the fluid grace of a predator, his footsteps silent despite his size. I realize I am holding my breath. He crouches down beside us, ignoring me completely for a long moment as he takes in his companion's injury, the blood pooling on the concrete, the pallor of his skin. His jaw tightens. Then those gray eyes shift to me, still kneeling in a stranger's blood, my hands pressed to a wound that will not stop bleeding. He studies me with unsettling focus, taking in my hospital scrubs beneath my jacket, my face, my hands, the terror I cannot hide. "That was my brother," he says, and his voice is low, smooth, laced with an accent I cannot quite place. British, maybe, or something close. But beneath the cultured tone lies something else. Danger, barely leashed. And despite everything, despite the guns and the blood and the impossible situation, I hear something else too. Gratitude. He rises in one smooth motion and gestures sharply. Two of his men holster their weapons and move forward, lifting the wounded man with practiced efficiency, supporting him between them. The man, his brother, groans but does not cry out. Then the gray-eyed man extends a hand to me. Not a request, a command. I stare at that hand, at the long fingers and the expensive watch glinting on his wrist, and I understand with sudden crystalline clarity that taking it will change everything. That I am standing at a threshold I cannot see, but can feel like electricity in the air. My hand trembles as I place it in his. His grip is warm, strong, pulling me to my feet as though I weigh nothing. He does not let go immediately. "You just saved his life," he says quietly, his eyes holding mine. "That makes you either very brave or very foolish." His thumb brushes across my knuckles. A gesture so brief, I almost think I imagined it. "Now you come with us." "I need to call an ambulance," I say, but my voice sounds thin and distant, even to my own ears. He is bleeding. He needs a hospital, proper treatment, a trauma surgeon. Alexander's gray eyes fix on me with an intensity that makes my words die in my throat. "No hospitals," he says, and the finality in his tone leaves no space for argument. "Hospitals mean police reports, questions, investigations that will put you in more danger than you can possibly understand. The men who shot my brother saw your face. They know you helped him. If your name appears on any official record tonight, you become a target." I open my mouth to protest, to explain that I am nobody, just a nurse who happened to be in the wrong place. But he is already guiding me toward the SUV with a hand on the small of my back, his touch firm and strangely warm through my jacket. One of the suited men, older than the others with silver threading through his dark hair, holds the door open. Alexander gestures for me to get in. "This is insane," I whisper, but I climb into the vehicle because what choice do I have? James is already inside, stretched across the back seat, his breathing shallow and rapid, his skin too pale. I slide in beside him automatically, my training overriding the surreal nightmare of the situation, checking his pulse at his throat, assessing his responsiveness. The SUV lurches into motion before Alexander even closes his door, the driver accelerating with terrifying speed through the parking garage and onto the street. I brace myself against the seat as we take corners too fast, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. Alexander sits across from me, his body angled toward us, watching me tend to his brother with that unnerving focus. I feel his gaze like a physical weight, like fingers trailing across my skin. "Keep pressure on the wound," I tell him, needing something to do with my hands, some illusion of control. He does not look away from my face. "You are doing that already." Minutes stretch into an eternity. The driver, silent and efficient, navigates through streets I do not recognize, heading away from the hospital district, away from anything familiar. "Where are we going?" I ask, and Alexander finally answers. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere my brother can receive treatment without putting all of us at risk." We arrive at gates that swing open automatically, revealing a long driveway lined with old trees, their branches forming a canopy overhead. The mansion at the end looks like something from another era, all stone and tall windows, lit from within by warm light. The SUV stops at the front entrance where a man in a white coat waits, medical bag already in hand. Alexander exits first, issuing rapid instructions I cannot fully hear, and then James is being lifted carefully, carried inside by several men who move with military precision. I follow because I do not know what else to do, my bloody hands hanging useless at my sides. The interior is all marble floors and high ceilings, expensive and cold. They take James to a room that has been converted into a functional medical suite, equipment I recognize from the hospital arranged with clear expertise. The doctor, middle-aged with steady hands, acknowledges me with a brief nod. "You are a nurse," Alexander says behind me. It is not a question. I nod numbly. "Then help him." So I do, because it is the only thing that makes sense, the only familiar ground in this tilting world. I assist as the doctor examines the wound, administers local anesthetic, begins the careful work of extracting the bullet and repairing damaged tissue. Alexander never leaves the room. He stands against the wall, arms crossed, his presence dominating the space despite his silence. I feel him watching every movement I make, every breath I take. When James is finally stable, stitched and bandaged, his vitals steady, the doctor steps back. "He will recover," the doctor says quietly, "thanks to her." Alexander's eyes find mine across the room. "You saved his life," he says, his voice low and certain. "That means you are now under my protection." "I need to go home," I say, and the words sound absurd even as they leave my mouth, too small for the magnitude of what has just happened. Alexander turns from where he stands near the door, his gray eyes settling on me with that same unsettling focus, and I feel pinned in place like a specimen under glass. I have work tomorrow, patients who need me, a life that is waiting. His expression does not change, but something shifts in the air between us, a tension that makes my skin prickle. "You cannot go home," he says simply, as though explaining something obvious to a child. "Why not?" I demand, hearing the edge of panic creeping into my voice. "I saved your brother, I did what you needed. Now I just want to go back to my apartment and pretend this never happened." He moves toward me with that predatory grace, closing the distance until he is too close, until I have to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "Because Richard Montague's men saw your face," he says quietly, and each word lands like a stone dropping into still water. "They watched you pull my brother to safety, watched you keep him alive while they tried to finish what they started. You are a witness, a liability, and more than that, you are now connected to me. That makes you a target." The ground seems to shift beneath my feet. I shake my head, wanting to reject what he is saying, wanting to believe I can just walk out of this mansion and return to my normal life. "I am nobody," I whisper. "They do not care about me." Alexander's jaw tightens. "They care about anything that can hurt me, and right now you fall into that category. If you go home, they will be waiting. They will take you, and they will use you to get to me and my brother. Do you understand what that means?" His hand lifts as though he might touch my face, but he stops himself, fingers curling into a fist before dropping back to his side. "It means pain, leverage, a very ugly death when they no longer need you." I feel cold despite the warmth of the room, despite the blood still drying on my hands and clothes. This cannot be real. This cannot be my life now. "What are you saying?" I ask, though I already know, can already feel the cage closing around me. You will stay here, Alexander says, and there is no negotiation in his tone. I have guest rooms. Anything you need will be provided. You will remain under my protection until the threat is neutralized. And how long will that take? I ask, my voice breaking. He does not answer immediately, and that silence tells me everything I need to know. Days, weeks, maybe longer. I have no phone, I realize suddenly, patting my pockets uselessly. I left my bag in my car, my keys, my entire life sitting in that parking garage. I need to call someone, tell them I am okay. Alexander pulls a phone from his pocket, but does not hand it to me. Who? He asks. My friend Catherine, I say. She will be worried. She will call the police if I do not check in. He considers this, his expression unreadable. No police, he says finally. I will have someone retrieve your vehicle and belongings, but you cannot contact anyone tonight. Tomorrow, perhaps, under controlled circumstances. You are not a prisoner, Eleanor. I am, though, I say, and his name tastes strange on my tongue. You are telling me I cannot leave, cannot call my friends, cannot live my life. That is exactly what a prisoner is. He steps even closer and I can smell expensive cologne and something darker, gunpowder maybe, or simply danger itself. I am keeping you alive, he says, his voice dropping lower. There is a difference. When he looks at me like this, gray eyes burning with an intensity that steals my breath, I feel something shift inside my chest. Fear, yes, but something else too. Something I have no name for. Something that terrifies me more than the guns and the blood and the impossible situation. He runs the Sinclair family, he tells me, answering the question I have not asked. One of the most powerful crime organizations in the city. Richard Montague runs a rival operation, and he has wanted me dead for 5 years. Tonight he nearly succeeded by going after my brother. Now he knows about you. I realize with dawning horror that the stranger I saved has chained me to a very dangerous man, and yet when Alexander looks at me with those piercing gray eyes, I feel something other than fear, something dangerous blooming beneath my ribs. I wake to sunlight slanting through unfamiliar windows, disoriented for a moment before reality crashes back with the weight of a collapsing building. The room around me is luxurious in a way I have never experienced, all cream-colored silk and dark wood furniture that probably costs more than I make in a year. I sit up slowly, my muscles aching from tension I carried even in sleep, and notice someone has left clean clothes folded on a chair near the bed, simple but expensive, definitely not mine. The door is my first thought. I cross to it on bare feet, half expecting it to be locked, but the handle turns smoothly under my palm. Not a prisoner, Alexander said, but the distinction feels thin as paper. I step into a hallway that could belong in a museum. Paintings I vaguely recognize as important lining walls, papered in subtle patterns. I move cautiously, listening for voices or footsteps, but hear only silence and the distant sound of water running. The mansion reveals itself in pieces as I explore. A grand staircase sweeping down to a marble-floored entryway. Rooms filled with furniture that looks antique and untouched. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of manicured grounds that stretch farther than I can see. Gardens and trees and high walls with men in dark suits patrolling at regular intervals. It looks like a fortress disguised as an estate, beautiful and impenetrable. I find the kitchen by following the scent of coffee, my stomach reminding me I have not eaten since before my shift yesterday. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair looks up from where she stands at the stove. You must be Eleanor, she says warmly, as though my presence here is perfectly normal. I am Martha. You look like you could use breakfast. I nod, not trusting my voice, and she gestures to a stool at the enormous island. I sit, feeling small and out of place in this world of marble and wealth. Martha moves efficiently, setting a plate of eggs and toast in front of me, pouring coffee into a delicate cup. Eat, she says gently. You have had a difficult night. I am halfway through the meal when I sense him before I see him. Alexander appears in the doorway, dressed impeccably in a dark suit that fits him like it was made for his body, which it probably was. His gray eyes find me immediately, and I feel that same jolt of awareness, that dangerous pull I cannot name. He dismisses Martha with a subtle nod, and she leaves us alone. Your apartment has been watched since last night, he says without preamble, pulling out his phone and tapping the screen before sliding it across the island to me. I look down at surveillance photos, grainy but clear enough. My building, my car in the parking lot. Men I do not recognize standing near the entrance, waiting. My stomach drops. Catherine has been trying to reach you, Alexander continues, his voice careful. 47 missed calls, 23 text messages. She will report you missing if you do not contact her soon. He produces another phone, sleek and unfamiliar. This line is secure. You can call her, but you cannot tell her where you are or what happened. Tell her you are safe, that you will explain later, nothing more. I take the phone with trembling fingers, staring at it like a lifeline to my real life, the one that feels like it belongs to someone else now. What do I say? I whisper. Alexander's expression softens almost imperceptibly. Whatever you need to, as long as it keeps her safe and keeps you here. The lie tastes bitter before I even dial, but I press Catherine's number and listen to it ring, wondering how I will ever explain this, wondering if I will ever be able to tell her the truth about the stranger I saved and the dangerous man who now holds my life in his hands. Days pass in a strange, suspended reality, where time moves differently than it did in my old life. I wake each morning in silk sheets, eat meals prepared by Martha in a kitchen larger than my entire apartment, and walk through rooms filled with art I recognize from textbooks, but never imagined seeing in a private home. I am a gilded prisoner, though Alexander never uses that word, and the bars of my cage are invisible, but no less real. James recovers with remarkable speed, the resilience of youth and excellent medical care working in his favor, and he seeks me out often, grateful in a way that makes me uncomfortable because I only did what anyone would have done. He is so different from his brother, open where Alexander is guarded, quick to smile where Alexander measures every expression. We sit in the sunroom on the third day, and he tells me stories, his voice warm with affection and old grief. Alexander raised me after our father was killed, he says, watching the gardens beyond the windows. I was 12, he was 17, and he could have sent me away to boarding school or let our uncle take over, but he refused. He stepped into a world that would have destroyed most men, and he did it to keep our family together, to keep me safe. I listen, and something shifts in my understanding. The dangerous crime lord, gaining dimension, becoming a boy who sacrificed his youth to protect his brother. James tells me about the early years, how Alexander learned brutality because mercy was weakness, how he built the Sinclair name back from near destruction, how every decision he makes is calculated to protect the people under his care. He is not a good man by the standards of the world you come from, James says quietly, but he is loyal, and there is honor in what he does, even if the law would not recognize it. I think about this often in the quiet moments, trying to reconcile the man who holds me here against my will with the man who sits vigil by his brother's bedside, who speaks to Martha with unexpected gentleness, who runs an empire with codes and structure rather than chaos. Alexander himself keeps his distance, but I catch him watching me. When I walk the gardens in the afternoon, trying to clear my head and feel less trapped, I look up to find him on the balcony above, his gray eyes tracking my movements before he turns away. When I discover the library and lose myself in books because reading is escape, he appears in the doorway ostensibly looking for a file, but he lingers, asking what I am reading, his voice careful as though I might shatter. The tension between us builds like a gathering storm, electricity in the air before lightning strikes, and I feel it in every accidental brush of hands, Every moment our eyes meet across a room. I should hate him for trapping me here, for upending my life, for being what he is. And yet I find myself watching for him, listening for his footsteps, wondering what it would feel like if he touched me with intention instead of accident. And that terrifies me more than the guns or the guards, or the impossible situation, because it means some part of me is adapting to this cage, finding reasons to stay that have nothing to do with safety and everything to do with the dangerous pull of a man I should want nothing to do with. The alarms shatter the stillness at 2 a.m., a shrieking wail that tears me from sleep and sends my heart hammering into my throat before I am fully conscious. I sit up in the darkness, disoriented, adrenaline flooding my system as the sound echoes through the mansion like a warning of the apocalypse. Red emergency lights flash in the hallway beyond my door, and I hear shouting, footsteps pounding, and then the unmistakable crack of gunfire somewhere below. My door slams open, and Alexander fills the doorway, dressed in black, a gun in his hand, and his face carved from granite and fury. He crosses to me in 3 strides, grabbing my hand and pulling me from the bed without a word, his grip iron and unyielding. We move through corridors I have never seen, hidden passages behind paneled walls that smell of dust and old wood, and the sounds of battle grow louder, closer, men shouting and more gunfire echoing through the estate like thunder. Richard Montague, Alexander says, the only explanation he offers, and my blood turns to ice because I understand what this means, that the enemy has found a way past all the defenses, past the walls and the guards and the illusion of safety. We descend narrow stairs that twist downward into darkness and emerge in a windowless room lined with concrete and steel, a safe room built for exactly this nightmare. Alexander positions himself between me and the door, his body a wall, his gun steady in his hand as he listens to the chaos beyond. I stand behind him, trembling, my hands clenched into fists to stop the shaking, and I watch the rigid line of his shoulders, the controlled violence in every line of his body. He is not afraid for himself, I realize, but for me, for James, for everyone under his protection, and the weight of that responsibility is visible in the tension radiating from him. Minutes stretch like hours, punctuated by bursts of gunfire and the crackle of voices through the radio clipped to his belt. Thomas issuing orders and reporting positions in clipped, efficient language I barely understand. I count my heartbeats, trying to stay calm, trying not to imagine what is happening above us, whether James is safe, whether Martha has made it to shelter. Alexander does not move, does not speak, a sentinel carved from stone and determination. When the silence finally falls, it is sudden and absolute, more terrifying than the noise because it could mean victory or massacre. Thomas's voice comes through the radio, strained but steady. All clear. 3 wounded, none critical, hostiles neutralized. Alexander exhales, the first sign of relief, and only then does he turn to me. His hand comes up to cup my face, his thumb brushing my cheekbone with a gentleness that seems impossible from a man who was ready to kill moments ago, and his gray eyes search mine with an intensity that steals my breath. I almost lost you, he says quietly, and I hear the fracture in his voice, the vulnerability he never shows, and I realize with startling clarity that if he had died tonight I would have mourned him deeply. Mourned the dangerous, impossible man who has become the axis around which my world now turns, and that terrifies me more than the gunfire or the blood, or the knowledge that I am irrevocably bound to a life where death waits behind every locked door. The attack changes everything between us, the violence stripping away pretense and leaving only raw truth in its wake. Alexander becomes more protective, his presence a constant shadow that should feel suffocating, but instead wraps around me like armor I did not know I needed. He insists I learn self-defense, appearing in the training room the morning after the assault with Thomas, and a determination that brooks no argument. You will never be helpless again, he tells me, and I hear the promise beneath the command, the vow that he will give me every tool to survive in his world. Thomas is patient and professional, teaching me basic strikes and how to break holds, But it is Alexander who makes my breath catch when he steps behind me to adjust my stance, his hands on my hips, his chest against my back, the heat of him seeping through my clothes and igniting something that has nothing to do with combat training. His voice is low in my ear as he guides my movements, telling me where to strike to disable an attacker, and the air crackles with unspoken desire that makes concentration nearly impossible. I learn quickly because fear is an excellent teacher, and because disappointing him feels unbearable in ways I do not want to examine too closely. Between training sessions, I learn about his world through observation and careful questions that he answers with surprising honesty. There are codes and hierarchies, territories and alliances, a brutal logic that governs every decision he makes. He is not a good man by conventional standards, I realize, as I watch him conduct business in his study, but he is loyal to those under his care, protective in ways that extend beyond mere strategy, and haunted by the violence that shapes every aspect of his life. I see it in the tension that never fully leaves his shoulders, in the way he checks exits in every room, in the nightmares that wake him at 3 a.m., though he thinks I do not notice. One evening he summons me to his study, and I find him by the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the darkened gardens where his guards patrol invisible perimeters. He offers me a drink without turning, and I accept, the amber liquid burning down my throat as I stand beside him in silence that feels companionable rather than tense. "Tell me about your father," I say quietly, and he goes still, so motionless I think he will refuse. But then he begins to speak, and I learn about the night that forged him. He was 17 when his father was killed in a power struggle that nearly destroyed the Sinclair family, and he had to become a man overnight, had to step into a role that required brutality and cunning, and the willingness to do things that would have horrified the boy he had been. "I raised James because no one else would," he says, his voice rough with old grief. "I built this empire because the alternative was watching everything my father died for crumble into nothing. I turned myself into something hard enough to survive, and I have never regretted it until now. Until you look at me, and I see myself through your eyes, and wonder what you see." I reach for his hand and he lets me take it, his fingers closing around mine with desperate strength, and I see past the armor to the boy beneath, the one who sacrificed his soul to protect his brother, and something inside me shifts irrevocably, the last resistance crumbling as I accept what I have been fighting since the moment he touched my face in that safe room, and I realized I would mourn him if he died. Thomas appears in the doorway of the library where I have been pretending to read for the past hour, his expression grim in a way that sends ice flooding through my veins before he even speaks. "Eleanor, you need to come with me," he says. And I am already standing because I know that tone, have heard it in the hospital when doctors delivered news that shattered lives. Alexander is in his study with James, both of them standing over a laptop on the desk. And when Alexander looks up at me, his face is carved from stone and fury, and something that looks like devastation. "They took Catherine," he says without preamble, and the room tilts sideways as my brain struggles to process the words. "A message arrived 10 minutes ago," Thomas adds, turning the laptop so I can see the screen. "And there is my best friend bound to a chair in some dim concrete room, her face bruised and terrified, and rage so pure it burns floods through me alongside the fear." "Richard Montague sent a video," Alexander continues, his voice tight with controlled violence. "He is offering a trade, you for her." And before he can say more, I am already speaking. "Then we make the trade," I say, and Alexander moves so fast I barely see him cross the room before his hands are on my shoulders, gripping hard enough to bruise. "Absolutely not," he says, and I hear the command in his voice, the expectation of obedience, but I am beyond caring about his authority or his power. "She is innocent," I say, my voice rising despite my attempts at control. "She is in danger because of me, because I saved James, because I stayed here, and I will not let her die for my choices." Alexander rages that I do not understand what I am facing, that Montague is ruthless and cunning and will kill us both the moment he has what he wants, that I am naive if I think this is anything other than a trap designed to destroy him by taking me. But even as he argues, I see something shift behind his eyes, see the tactical mind that built an empire calculating angles and possibilities. He will not let me go, I realize, but he will also not let Catherine die, because despite everything, he is a man who understands loyalty and the debts we owe to those we love. James and Thomas exchange glances, and I know they see it too, the plan forming in the silence between Alexander's words. I have to try, I say quietly, holding his gaze and letting him see my determination, my refusal to be protected at Catherine's expense. Alexander closes his eyes briefly as if in pain, and when he opens them again, they burn with an intensity that steals my breath. If we do this, you follow my instructions exactly, he says, each word precise and weighted with meaning. No deviation, no improvisation. No heroics beyond what I tell you. Do you understand me, Eleanor? I nod because I do understand. Understand that he is terrified in a way that has nothing to do with business or territory or power, and everything to do with the possibility of losing me. He makes me promise, actually takes my face in his hands, and makes me swear on everything I value that I will do exactly as he says. And when I give him my word, I see the fear in his eyes that he is trying so hard to hide, fear not for himself, but for me. And it steals my breath and breaks my heart because I know what it costs him to let me walk into danger, even with every protection he can provide. The exchange is set for midnight at an abandoned warehouse on the eastern docks, a location Thomas confirms through reconnaissance is as dangerous as expected. All blind corners and rusted metal and shadows deep enough to hide an army. Alexander spends 6 hours positioning his men at every exit and vantage point, turning the trap Montague intended into one of his own design. And I watch him work with cold precision that should frighten me, but instead makes me feel safer than I have any right to feel walking into hell. He fits me with a wire so thin I can barely feel it against my skin, and a tracking device sewn into the lining of my jacket. Technology that will let him follow my every movement and hear every word. When it is time to leave, he pulls me aside in the armory, where his men are checking weapons and loading magazines, his hands framing my face with a gentleness that contrasts sharply with the gun holstered at his side. You stay calm, you stay smart, and the moment I give the signal you get down and you stay down, he tells me, and I nod because my voice will not work past the fear closing my throat. I see Thomas slip something into my pocket as we walk to the cars, and when I check later I find a small folding knife, insurance I pray I will not need. The drive to the docks feels both endless and far too short, the city lights giving way to industrial darkness, and the smell of salt water and decay. Alexander does not speak during the drive, but his hand finds mine in the shadows of the back seat and holds on with desperate strength until we arrive, and he has to let go and become the cold strategist who will orchestrate my survival. I step out of the car alone as instructed, my legs unsteady beneath me, and walk toward the warehouse entrance that yawns open like a mouth ready to swallow me whole. Every instinct I possess screams to run back to Alexander, to the safety of his arms and his protection, but Catherine is inside, and I will not abandon her to save myself. The interior is exactly as dark and threatening as I imagined, dim emergency lighting casting everything in sickly yellow, and then I see her, and my heart breaks. Catherine is bound to a chair in the center of the space, her face bruised and swollen, terror bright in her eyes when she sees me and realizes what I have done. Richard Montague steps from the shadows, and he is older than I expected, perhaps 60, with silver hair and cruel eyes that assess me like merchandise, smiling with predatory satisfaction. So brave, he says, circling me slowly while his men materialize from the darkness, at least 8 that I can count, all armed. So incredibly foolish. He tells me I have spirit, And it is almost a shame that Alexander Sinclair has such poor taste in pets, and rage flares hot beneath my fear at the dismissal, the reduction of everything I am to something Alexander owns. Montague reveals with casual cruelty that he never intended to honor the exchange, that he will kill us both and send our bodies back to Alexander as a message about the cost of crossing him, and my blood turns to ice as I realize the trap is closing and I have walked into it willingly. Then Alexander's voice comes through the earpiece hidden beneath my hair, calm and certain and utterly unafraid. "Trust me, Eleanor," he says. And I grab onto those words like a lifeline as gunfire suddenly erupts from every direction and chaos consumes everything. I throw myself toward Catherine the instant the gunfire erupts, my body moving on pure instinct as bullets tear through the air around us with sounds like metal wasps, and my hands find the knife Thomas gave me, fumbling it open as I reach her chair. Catherine is screaming my name, or maybe just screaming, her eyes wide with terror as I saw frantically at the zip ties binding her wrists, the plastic finally giving way, just as wood explodes from a crate 2 feet from my head. "Get down!" I shout, pulling her off the chair and dragging her behind a stack of rusted metal containers, our bodies pressed against concrete that smells of oil and decay. Bullets ricochet off steel with sparks that light the darkness in brief flashes, and through the chaos I see Alexander moving through the warehouse like something inhuman, lethal, and precise, his movements economical and devastating as he takes down Montague's men with terrifying efficiency that should horrify me, but instead fills me with fierce pride and darker relief. Catherine clutches my arm hard enough to bruise, her breath coming in panicked gasps against my shoulder, and I cover her body with mine as much as possible, making myself a shield between her and the violence consuming the space around us. I catch glimpses of Thomas and James fighting in coordinated silence, see Alexander's men pouring in from exits I had not noticed, turning Montague's trap into his own execution. Then through a gap in the containers I see Richard Montague himself, his silver hair disheveled and his cruel face twisted with rage, and he is raising a gun with deliberate intention, the barrel tracking directly toward where Catherine and I are huddled, and time slows to syrup thickness as I realize we are exposed and he is going to fire. I tense to move, to throw us sideways, but before I can even begin, Alexander appears in my line of sight, his own weapon raised, and his gray eyes cold as winter death, and he fires 3 times in rapid succession, the sound cracking through the warehouse like thunder. Montague jerks backward with each impact and falls, his gun clattering across concrete, and the finality of his collapse seems to drain the violence from the air all at once. The silence that follows is deafening, broken only by Catherine's ragged breathing and the ringing in my ears, and then Alexander is crossing the space between us with long strides, his gun still in his hand, but his face transformed by something raw and desperate. He reaches me and hauls me upright with hands that shake despite their strength, pulling me into his arms with a desperation that mirrors the wild pounding of my own heart, and he holds me so tightly I can barely breathe. But I do not care because I am alive and he is alive, and Catherine is sobbing with relief beside us. Alexander pulls back only far enough to frame my face with his hands, his gray eyes blazing as they search mine for injury or trauma, and then he kisses me with fierce claiming intensity that tastes of gunpowder and terror and unspoken promises. I kiss him back with everything I have, all my fear and relief and impossible feelings pouring into that single moment of contact, my hands fisting in his jacket to pull him closer as if I can merge us into one being that can never be separated or threatened again. Catherine is taken to a secure private hospital 40 miles outside the city, a facility Thomas assures me is owned by someone who owes Alexander favors and will ask no questions about gunshot residue on our clothes or the terror still bright in my friend's eyes. Alexander insists on a full medical evaluation despite Catherine's protests that she is fine, just bruised and scared, and I stay with her through every examination, holding her hand while doctors check for injuries I pray they will not find. She is released after 3 hours with painkillers and sedatives, admitted under the name Sarah Collins, and Alexander posts 2 guards outside her door with instructions that no one enters without his explicit approval. I want to stay with her through the night, but Catherine sees the way I keep glancing toward the door where Alexander waits in the hallway, and she squeezes my hand with surprising strength. "Go to him," she whispers. "He just killed someone for you," and the blunt truth of it steals my breath, even as I recognize she is right. The drive back to the estate happens in loaded silence, Alexander beside me in the back seat, while Thomas drives, and dawn begins to gray the eastern sky, the adrenaline that kept me moving finally draining away and leaving me hollow and shaking. Alexander notices, always notices, and pulls me against his side without asking permission, his arms solid and warm around my shoulders. And I let myself lean into him because I am too exhausted to maintain the pretense that I do not need this, do not need him. Back at the mansion, I expect him to retreat to his study or his room to process the night's violence in whatever solitary way dangerous men handle such things. But instead, he follows me to my suite and closes the door behind us. And suddenly, we are alone in a way we have not been since that kiss in the warehouse. "We need to talk," I say, my voice rough from screaming and smoke, and he nods slowly, shedding his jacket and shoulder holster with economical movements before sitting on the edge of my bed like he belongs there. I remain standing because sitting feels too intimate, too much like surrender, and I force myself to ask the question burning through my exhausted mind. "What are we, Alexander? What is this?" He is quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes tracking over my face with an intensity that makes me feel stripped bare, and when he finally speaks, his voice is low and rough with honesty that costs him. "I cannot let you go, Eleanor. Not because of Montague or the danger or any tactical reason. Because I do not want to. You are the first person in years who has looked at me and seen something other than a weapon or a monster, who stayed when you could have run, who walked into hell to save your friend knowing I would follow." He stands and crosses to me, his hands gentle when they frame my face. "You have become necessary to me in a way that terrifies me more than any bullet or betrayal, and I know I have no right to ask you to stay in this world, but I am asking anyway." I should tell him no, should recognize the insanity of choosing this life and this man. But when I search inside myself for fear or doubt, I find only certainty, sharp as broken glass. Running from him feels like tearing myself in half, like amputating something vital I will never recover. I am terrified, I admit, my hands coming up to grip his wrists, of what staying means, of who I might become, of loving someone the world will always want to destroy. But I am more terrified of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. His expression transforms, vulnerability and relief and fierce possession warring across his features. "I promise you honesty," he says, his forehead touching mine. "I promise you protection and as much normalcy as my world allows. I promise I will never lie to you about the dangers we face or the choices we must make." I choose him then, fully and irrevocably, with my eyes open to every dark consequence, and I seal the choice with a kiss that tastes of ash and promise and terrifying hope. Integrating into Alexander's world proves harder than I anticipated, the reality of his life unfolding in layers that reveal themselves slowly, like a dark flower blooming in shadows I never knew existed. The extended family arrives 3 days after Montague's death, summoned for what Thomas calls a council meeting, and I watch from the landing as they gather in Alexander's study, men and women in expensive clothes whose eyes assess every angle and weakness with predatory precision. Alexander insists I attend, his hand firm on the small of my back as he guides me into the room where conversations halt mid-sentence, and every face turns toward me with expressions ranging from open curiosity to barely concealed hostility. "This is Eleanor Ashworth," Alexander says, his voice carrying the weight of command and something more possessive. "She saved James's life and mine. She is under my protection, and you will treat her with the respect that entails." I see some nod with what might be approval, while others exchange glances that speak of calculations I cannot read, assessments of whether I am an asset or a liability to the man who controls their fortunes and fates. A woman named Victoria, elegant and cold with diamonds at her throat, approaches me after the meeting with a smile sharp as a knife blade. "You are very brave or very foolish," she says, "and I cannot tell which is more dangerous for someone in Alexander's orbit." Over the following weeks, I meet soldiers and allies, attend dinners where conversation flows in careful code about territories and shipments and debts, learn to recognize the hierarchy in who sits where, and who speaks first, and whose opinion Alexander actually values. Some respect me for saving James, treating me with cautious courtesy that feels like acceptance even if it is only performance. Others see me as exactly what Victoria named, a weakness Alexander cannot afford, a soft target that enemies will exploit. I prove myself the only way I know how, refusing to hide when threats arise, insisting on learning the security protocols and backup plans, memorizing faces and names and alliances until Alexander's world becomes a map I can navigate, even if I will never belong to it the way he does. Alexander struggles visibly with balancing his need to protect me with respect for my autonomy, and we clash repeatedly over my insistence on being present during meetings he deems too dangerous, my refusal to accept guards shadowing my every movement within the estate walls. "You do not understand what you are asking," he says during one particularly heated argument, his control fraying at the edges. "These men have killed for less than the leverage you represent." "I understand perfectly," I counter, "that you cannot lock me away like a possession and expect me to be satisfied with ignorance while you face threats alone. We reconcile always with raw honesty and careful compromise, learning each other's boundaries through trial and painful error, finding the balance between his protective instincts and my need for agency." James becomes a true friend during this integration, his easy warmth and terrible jokes a relief from the constant tension of navigating dangerous politics, and he tells me stories about Alexander's rare moments of humor that make the fearsome man I love seem suddenly human and reachable. Thomas, too, softens toward me, admitting one evening over the security monitors that I am good for his boss, that he has not seen Alexander this settled in years, despite the chaos my presence has brought. Catherine visits once she is recovered enough to travel, brought to the estate under heavy guard and fake identification that makes her laugh despite the fear still lurking in her eyes. She sees immediately how I have changed, the way I stand straighter and move through the mansion with confidence that was not there before, the way Alexander's gaze tracks me across rooms with possession and pride and undeniable love. "You are stronger now," she says when we are alone in the garden, and utterly gone for him, and I cannot decide if I should worry or celebrate. I tell her the truth, that I am both terrified and certain, that loving Alexander means accepting danger as the price of choosing him. She hugs me tightly and whispers that she accepts my choice even as she worries. And when she leaves, I feel the last tether to my old life stretch but not break, transforming into something that can span the distance between who I was and who I am becoming. The intelligence report arrives on a Tuesday morning while I am having coffee in the sunroom, Thomas delivering it personally with an expression that tells me everything before he speaks a single word. And when Alexander reads the encrypted message, his jaw tightens in a way I have learned means he is calculating threats and possibilities at terrifying speed. "Marcus Hartley has assumed control of what remains of Montague's operations," Alexander says without preamble, his gray eyes finding mine across the table with an intensity that makes my pulse quicken. "He is younger than Richard, more reckless, and our sources indicate he is planning something significant within the next 72 hours. He does not say that I am the target, but I see it written clearly in the tension bracketing his mouth, the protective fury gathering like a storm behind his carefully controlled expression." Over the following hours, the estate transforms into a fortress preparing for siege, additional guards posted at every entrance, security systems upgraded to military specifications, and I watch Alexander coordinate it all with the precision of a general who has fought too many wars. That evening, he comes to my room with a proposal that steals the breath from my lungs. "I want you to leave the country," he says bluntly, standing near the window with his hands in his pockets like casual conversation when I can see the rigid line of his shoulders. "Thomas has arranged a private flight to a property I own in Switzerland. You will be safe there until Hartley is dealt with." The words land like a physical blow, and I feel anger ignite hot and fierce in my chest. "You want to send me away?" I say, my voice dangerously quiet. "You want me to run and hide while you face this threat alone?" "It is not running," he counters, his control slipping enough that I hear the desperation beneath. "It is keeping you alive." We argue then with a viciousness that surprises us both, years of accumulated fear and frustration pouring out in accusations that cut deep and draw blood. He tells me I am underestimating the danger, that Hartley will use me to destroy him, that my stubbornness will get us both killed. I tell him he is trying to control me like a possession he can lock away when the world becomes inconvenient, that I did not choose this life to be separated from him the moment it becomes difficult. "You do not understand what losing you would do to me," he finally says, his voice raw with honesty that costs him everything. "You have become the center of my world, Eleanor, the thing that makes me vulnerable in ways I swore I would never allow again, and I cannot watch you die because of me." I cross to him then and take his face in my hands, forcing him to meet my eyes and see the truth I am offering. I am just as terrified, I admit, feeling tears burn hot behind my eyes. I am terrified every time you leave this house that you will not come back, that someone will take you from me and I will be left with nothing but the ghost of what we could have had. But I will not survive being sent away, wondering if you are alive or dead, Alexander. If we face this threat, we face it together or not at all. Something breaks in his expression, the last wall crumbling, and he pulls me against him with a desperation that mirrors my own. We make love that night with an urgency born of fear and defiance, a promise sealed in the tangle of sheets and whispered words that sound like prayers. And when dawn arrives gray and cold through the windows, we lie wrapped together making plans to face the threat as the partners we have chosen to become. The charity gala is scheduled for Saturday evening at the Grand Astoria Hotel, a glittering public stage where Alexander can display power and control while drawing Marcus Hartley into a trap built from crystal chandeliers and false security. And I spend the afternoon being transformed by a stylist Alexander hired, my hair swept into an elegant twist, while makeup artists paint my face into a version of myself I barely recognize. Polished and sophisticated, and utterly unlike the exhausted nurse who stumbled into this world through an act of thoughtless courage. The gown Alexander chose arrives in a black garment bag, emerald silk that flows like water and clings in ways that make me flush when I catch my reflection. And when I descend the stairs, he is waiting in the foyer dressed in a black tuxedo that makes him look like danger wrapped in civilization, his gray eyes darkening as they travel over me with possession and something deeper that steals my breath. "You are breathtaking," he says quietly, offering his arm, and I take it feeling the coiled tension in his muscles beneath the expensive fabric, knowing that tonight might end in blood despite the elegant trap he has constructed. The ballroom is magnificent when we arrive. Hundreds of guests in designer clothes mingling beneath chandeliers while a string quartet plays and waiters circulate with champagne, and I recognize some faces from the council meetings, allies positioned strategically throughout the space, along with security disguised as staff and guests. Alexander keeps me close, his hand possessive on my waist, as he navigates conversations with businessmen and politicians who pretend not to know the truth of what he is, and I play my role perfectly, smiling and nodding while my heart pounds against my ribs with awareness that somewhere in this glittering crowd, danger is waiting for its moment. The attack comes at 9:47, according to the ornate clock above the entrance. Three men moving with synchronized precision toward where Alexander stands talking with a city council member, but Thomas is faster, his signal sending security into motion before the weapons clear their jackets. and I watch the choreographed response unfold with terrifying efficiency as guests scream and scatter while Alexander's men neutralize the threat with minimal bloodshed, the would-be assassin subdued and removed before most people understand what nearly happened. Alexander never moves from my side, his body angled to shield me even as his organization dismantles the attack, and when silence falls broken only by shocked whispers and the string quartet's stuttering halt, he turns to me with eyes that burn with relief and determination, and something I have learned to recognize as love stripped of all pretense. The ballroom empties quickly, security ushering guests out with practiced apologies about a disturbance, while James coordinates cleanup and Thomas interrogates the captured men in a back room. And suddenly Alexander and I stand alone in the wreckage of overturned chairs and abandoned champagne glasses, the chandeliers still glittering overhead like stars indifferent to human violence. "Eleanor," he says, and his voice carries a weight that makes everything else disappear. "I have spent my entire adult life building walls and maintaining control, convincing myself that connection was weakness I could not afford. But you have demolished every defense I constructed and shown me that living without you is not protection, but a different kind of death." He takes my hands in his, and I feel them trembling slightly. This powerful, dangerous man, made vulnerable by what he is about to ask. "Marry me, not because of the danger or obligation, or any reason except that I love you, and I want you beside me for whatever future we can forge from this impossible life, as my partner and equal in everything that matters." I see past the kingpin to the man who raised his brother alone, who carries ghosts and responsibilities that would crush lesser people, who looked at an ordinary nurse with blood on her hands and chose to let her see beneath his armor. "Yes," I say, and the word contains every fear and hope and fierce determination I have learned since that night in the parking garage. Yes, because I love you, and because I choose this life and you with full knowledge of what it costs and what it offers. He kisses me then, with a tenderness that makes tears burn behind my eyes, a promise sealed in the wreckage and the glittering light, and when we finally part, I know that our future will hold danger and uncertainty and moments of fear that steal breath. But we will face them together, bound by choice and sacrifice, and a love forged in fire that has transformed us both into something stronger than we were alone.